The sight of a lone wagon rattling down the dusty trail toward the Double H Ranch would not have been unusual on that scorching August afternoon in 1884, except for the fact that the driver was a woman traveling without escort, and the incessant clucking emanating from wooden crates stacked high in the wagon bed could be heard a quarter-mile before she even reached the front gate. Jack Harrington straightened from where he had been mending fence posts, squinting against the relentless Texas sun as he watched the curious procession approach. He was 26 years old, lean and weathered from years of ranch work, with dark hair that perpetually needed cutting and eyes the color of summer storm clouds. He had been working at the Double H for nearly 5 years now, ever since his own family's small homestead had failed during the drought of '79. The ranch owner, Harold Henderson, treated his hands fairly and paid on time, which was more than could be said for many outfits in this part of Colorado County. As the wagon drew closer, Jack could make out more details about the unexpected visitor. She sat ramrod straight on the driver's bench, handling the reins with capable hands that suggested she had been driving teams for years. Her hair, a remarkable shade somewhere between honey and copper, was pulled back in a practical braid beneath a wide-brimmed hat that had seen better days. Even from a distance, Jack could see the determined set of her jaw and the way her eyes scanned the ranch buildings with an assessing gaze that spoke of intelligence and purpose. The chickens continued their raucous commentary on the journey, their protests growing louder as the wagon jolted over the rutted path leading to the main house. Jack counted at least 6 crates, possibly more, all apparently filled with very vocal poultry. He set down his tools and started walking toward the house, curious despite himself about what business this woman might have with old Harold Henderson. The ranch owner emerged from the barn just as the wagon pulled to a stop in the yard between the house and the bunkhouse. Henderson was a barrel-chested man in his 60s with a salt and pepper beard and shrewd eyes that missed very little. He removed his hat as he approached the wagon, ever the gentleman despite decades of rough ranch living. "Miss Thornton, I presume?" Henderson's voice carried easily across the yard, and Jack felt his steps slow as realization dawned. This must be the niece Henderson had mentioned a few weeks back, the one who had written asking for a place to stay after some family trouble back east. Henderson had been characteristically vague about the details, but he had agreed to let her come and help his wife Sarah with the household duties. "Mr. Henderson?" the woman replied, her voice clear and confident despite what must have been an exhausting journey. "I appreciate you allowing me to come. I hope my telegram about the chickens arrived in time." Henderson's expression suggested that no such telegram had arrived, but he recovered quickly. "Can't say I received any telegram, Miss Thornton, but chickens are always welcome on a ranch. How many have you got there?" 47, she said, climbing down from the wagon with a grace that suggested she needed no assistance. She was tall for a woman, probably 5 feet 7 inches, and her traveling dress, though dusty from the road, was well made and practical. "I know it might seem excessive, but they are excellent layers, and I have been breeding them for 3 years. I simply could not leave them behind." Jack had reached the yard by now, hanging back near the corner of the barn, but close enough to hear the conversation clearly. He watched as Sarah Henderson bustled out of the house, wiping her hands on her apron and exclaiming with delight at the arrival of her husband's niece. "Emmeline, dear girl, you must be exhausted. Come inside at once and have something cool to drink. Harold, have the men see to unhitching the team and unloading her things." Sarah was a plump, cheerful woman, whose warm heart had made the Double H a more pleasant place to work than many ranches Jack had known. "Mrs. Henderson, that is very kind, but I must see to my chickens first," Emmeline said firmly. "They have been cooped up for days during the journey from Missouri, and they need proper shelter immediately. If someone could direct me to where I might set up temporary quarters for them, I can handle the rest myself." Henderson looked somewhat taken aback by this declaration, but before he could respond, Jack found himself stepping forward. "Begging your pardon, ma'am, but there is not really anywhere suitable at the moment. We have got a few chickens that free-range around the place, but nothing like what you would need for that many birds." Emmeline turned to look at him fully for the first time, and Jack felt an unexpected jolt as her eyes met his. They were green, he realized, a deep forest green with flecks of gold that caught the sunlight. There was wariness in her gaze, but also a stubborn determination that he suspected had gotten her through whatever circumstances had brought her to Texas. "Then I will need to build something," she said simply. "If someone could point me toward lumber and tools, I can construct a temporary shelter before nightfall." "Miss Thornton, surely that is not necessary," Henderson began. But Emmeline cut him off with a polite but firm shake of her head. "Mr. Henderson, I am deeply grateful for your hospitality, but I will not impose upon it any more than necessary. These chickens are my responsibility and my livelihood. I have some money saved, and I will pay for any materials I use. I simply need to know where I can build." Sarah Henderson exchanged a glance with her husband, and Jack could see the older woman's eyes twinkling with what looked like approval. "Harold, why don't you show Emmeline where she might put up something for her chickens, and then she can come inside and freshen up? I am sure a compromise can be reached." What happened next surprised everyone, including Jack himself. He heard his own voice saying, "I could build a proper coop for the chickens. We have got plenty of lumber left over from when we rebuilt the barn last spring, and it would not take more than a few days to put together something solid." Henderson looked at him with raised eyebrows. "You have got enough work on your plate already, Jack." "The fence mending can wait," Jack said, surprising himself with his insistence. "Those chickens need shelter, and throwing together something makeshift will just mean having to rebuild it properly later anyway. Might as well do it right the first time." Emmeline studied him with those remarkable green eyes, her expression unreadable. "I could not ask you to do that. As I said, I am perfectly capable of building something myself." "I am sure you are, ma'am," Jack replied, meeting her gaze steadily. "But I have been building ranch structures for years, and I can do it faster and sturdier than most. No offense intended." A flicker of something that might have been amusement crossed Emmeline's face. "None taken. But I insist on helping with the construction, and I will contribute to the cost of materials." Henderson waved his hand dismissively. "We will not hear of it. You are family, Emmeline, and the ranch can spare some lumber. Jack, you go ahead and get started. Take Billy to help if you need an extra pair of hands. Emmeline, you come inside with Sarah and get settled. Those chickens will be fine in their crates for another few hours." Emmeline looked as though she wanted to argue, but Sarah had already linked arms with her and was steering her toward the house. "Come along, dear. You can tell me all about your journey and those beautiful chickens of yours. I have been wanting to improve our egg production, so perhaps you can give me some advice." Jack watched them go, noting the stiff set of Emmeline's shoulders and the way she glanced back toward the wagon several times before disappearing into the house. She was clearly a woman who was not accustomed to relying on others, and he found himself curious about what had driven her to leave Missouri and travel all the way to Texas with nothing but a wagon full of chickens for company. "Well, you have certainly committed yourself to something," Henderson said, pulling Jack's attention back to the present. "I hope you know what you are getting into." "It is just a chicken coop, sir," Jack replied, though he had the uncomfortable feeling that Henderson was not talking about carpentry. Henderson smiled, a knowing expression that made Jack wonder if the older man had seen something in his face when he looked at Emmeline. "Just a chicken coop. Right, well, you'd better get started measuring out a good spot. Knowing my niece, she'll be out here within the hour to supervise, regardless of what Sarah says about resting." Henderson was right. Jack had barely finished pacing out a suitable location behind the main barn, where there was good drainage and some natural shade from a stand of cottonwood trees, when Emmeline appeared. She had changed from her traveling dress into a simpler calico work dress and had tied a fresh apron around her waist. Her hair was still in its long braid, but a few escaped tendrils curled around her face in the humid heat. "I thought you might be resting," Jack said, straightening from where he had been driving stakes to mark the corners of the structure he had in mind. "I am not much for resting while there is work to be done," Emmeline replied. She looked at the marked area with a critical eye. "This is generous. Larger than I expected." "Well, you have got 47 chickens, and they will need room to be comfortable. Stressed chickens do not lay well." Jack felt oddly self-conscious under her scrutiny, wondering if his plan would meet with her approval. "You know about chickens?" There was genuine interest in her voice now, and some of the wariness had faded from her expression. My mother kept a flock when I was growing up. Not as large as yours, but enough that I learned a thing or two. Jack pulled out the rough sketch he'd been working on, showing the design he had in mind. I was thinking of building something like this. Main coop here for roosting and nesting boxes with an enclosed run that they can use during the day. We can also let them free range when you're around to keep an eye out for predators. Emmeline took the sketch, studying it with an intensity that suggested she was truly evaluating the design rather than just being polite. Jack noticed that her hands were not the soft hands of a lady who had never worked. There were small calluses on her fingers and a thin white scar across the back of her left hand that spoke of practical experience. "This is excellent," she said finally, and Jack felt an absurd surge of pleasure at the approval in her tone. "You have thought about ventilation and protection from the elements, and having the roosting area elevated will help keep them safe from snakes and other threats." "We get rattlers around here sometimes," Jack confirmed, "and coyotes are always a problem. I was planning to reinforce the lower sections with some spare tin sheeting we have got, just to make sure nothing can dig under or claw through." "You are putting a great deal of thought into this." Emmeline handed the sketch back to him, but her eyes remained on his face, searching. "Why?" The directness of the question caught Jack off guard. He fumbled for an answer that would not sound foolish or presumptuous. "Well, Mr. Henderson has been good to me, and you are his family, so I suppose I want to make a good impression. And besides, any animal in my care deserves to be treated properly, chickens included." It was not the whole truth, but it was not exactly a lie either. Jack was not ready to examine too closely why the sight of this woman had prompted him to volunteer for extra work during the busiest season on the ranch. Emmeline nodded slowly, seeming to accept his explanation. "Then I will help. I may not have your carpentry experience, but I can follow instructions and I am stronger than I look." "I do not doubt it," Jack said, meaning it. "But are you sure? Building a structure in this heat is hard work, and you just arrived after what must have been a difficult journey." "The journey from Missouri was difficult because I was alone and constantly worried about something happening to my chickens," Emmeline replied. "Building something useful with my own hands is never difficult. It is necessary." There was a story behind those words, Jack thought, but he did not press. Instead, he nodded and handed her one of the stakes. "All right, then, help me finish marking out the dimensions, and then we can start gathering materials." They worked together in companionable silence for the next hour, measuring and marking, and then hauling lumber from the storage shed near the barn. Billy, a lanky 18-year-old who had been working at the Double H for only 6 months, joined them and proved useful for the heavier lifting. But it was Emmeline who surprised Jack with her stamina and her obvious familiarity with construction work. "You have built things before," he observed, as she expertly sorted lumber by size and quality, setting aside pieces that were too warped or damaged to be useful. "My father was a carpenter before he became a farmer," Emmeline said, not looking up from her work. "He taught me and my brothers how to work with wood. He said it was a practical skill that everyone should have." "Was?" Jack caught the past tense and immediately wished he had not. "I'm sorry, I did not mean to pry." "He died 2 years ago," Emmeline said matter-of-factly, though Jack noticed the way her hands stilled for just a moment. "Pneumonia. My mother passed when I was young, so it was just him and my 2 older brothers. After he died, things became complicated." She did not elaborate, and Jack respected her privacy enough not to ask. They continued working until Sarah Henderson called them in for supper, by which time they had all the materials sorted and ready to begin construction the following morning. Dinner at the main house was a lively affair, with Henderson and his wife asking Emmeline about her journey and her plans. Jack ate quietly, as was his custom when dining with the ranch owners, but he found his attention drawn repeatedly to Emmeline. She spoke with animation about her chickens, explaining her breeding program and the specific characteristics she had been working to enhance. "I have been focusing on egg production primarily, but also on temperament," she explained, accepting a second helping of potatoes from Sarah. "A good laying hen should be productive, but if she is too flighty or aggressive, she creates problems in the flock. I have been selecting for calm, steady birds that can handle changes in routine without stopping their laying." "That is fascinating," Sarah said warmly. "How did you learn about breeding techniques?" Trial and error mostly, and reading every agricultural journal I could get my hands on, Emmeline replied. My father's farm was struggling, and I thought that if I could develop a superior flock, we could sell eggs and breeding stock to help make ends meet. It worked for a while. Until your brothers decided that chickens were not worth their time? Henderson's question was gentle but knowing, and Emmeline's expression tightened slightly. My brothers had different ideas about how to run the farm after father died. They wanted to focus solely on wheat, despite the fact that grain prices have been falling for years. When I suggested diversifying our income streams, they told me I was being foolish and that I should concentrate on finding a husband instead of playing at being a farmer. The bitterness in her voice was unmistakable, and Jack felt a surge of indignation on her behalf. He knew plenty of women who worked as hard as any man on the frontier, and the dismissive attitude of Emmeline's brothers rankled him. So you decided to come to Texas, Sarah said softly, reaching over to pat Emmeline's hand. So I decided that if my brothers were going to treat my work as worthless, I would take my chickens and start over somewhere that I might be appreciated, Emmeline corrected. Uncle Harold, I cannot thank you enough for agreeing to let me come. I promise I will earn my keep. Sarah, I am a good cook and a hard worker, and I will help with whatever household tasks you need. And my chickens will provide more than enough eggs for the ranch, with plenty left over to sell in town. You will do no such thing, Henderson said firmly, but his eyes were kind. You are family, Emmeline, and this is your home now for as long as you want it. We are happy to have you, chickens and all, though I will admit I did not quite realize you meant to bring an entire flock. 47 is hardly an entire flock, Emmeline said with the first genuine smile Jack had seen from her, but I suppose it is more than most people expect. Well, thank goodness Jack here volunteered to build you a proper coop, Henderson said, glancing at Jack with that same knowing look from earlier. Otherwise, we might have had chickens roosting all over the ranch. After dinner, Jack excused himself and headed back to the bunkhouse, where 3 other ranch hands were playing cards by lamplight. They looked up as he entered, and Charlie, the oldest of the group at 42, grinned widely. Heard you volunteered to build the new lady a chicken palace, Shano, Charlie said, shuffling the deck with practiced ease. That is mighty generous of you, Jack. The chickens need somewhere to live, and we had the materials, Jack replied, hanging his hat on the peg by his bunk and trying to sound casual. Uh-huh. And the fact that the lady is young and pretty had nothing to do with your sudden interest in poultry housing? Charlie's grin widened, and the other 2 men chuckled. She is the boss's niece, Jack said repressively. I'm just trying to make her feel welcome. Sure you are, Billy piped up from where he was studying his cards. I saw the way you looked at her when she first drove up, like you had been struck by lightning. Jack felt heat rising in his face, and busied himself with removing his boots. You all are seeing things that are not there. Now, are we playing cards or gossiping like old women? They let the subject drop, but Jack could feel their amused glances throughout the evening. He tried to focus on his cards, but his mind kept drifting back to green eyes and determined hands sorting lumber in the fading sunlight. He told himself firmly that he was being ridiculous. Emmeline Thornton was his employer's niece, clearly educated and from a better background than his own. The fact that she had fallen on hard times and been forced to come to Texas did not change the gulf between their circumstances. Besides, she had just arrived. For all he knew, she had left a beau back in Missouri and would be returning there as soon as she got back on her feet. The smart thing would be to build her chicken coop, treat her with polite respect, and keep his foolish heart from getting any ideas. But when he finally lay down to sleep that night, his last thoughts were of the way Emmeline had studied his building plans with such focused intelligence, and the way her rare smile had transformed her entire face. The next morning dawned hot and clear, promising another scorching day. Jack was up with the sun, as always, and after a quick breakfast with the other hands, he headed to the building site. He was surprised to find Emmeline already there, wearing a simple work dress with her sleeves rolled up and her hair in a severe braid down her back. She had set up a makeshift table using 2 sawhorses and a plank, and had organized all the tools they would need. You are up early, Jack said, setting down the additional supplies he had brought. Old habits, Emmeline replied. On the farm, we were always up before dawn. I've never been able to sleep past sunrise, even when I try. Same here, Jack admitted. Well, since you are so eager to get started, why don't we begin with the foundation? We will need to dig post holes first. They fell into a steady rhythm, with Jack marking the spots for the posts and Emmeline following behind with the post hole digger. It was brutal work in the building heat, and Jack kept expecting her to flag or complain, but she matched him pace for pace. When he suggested they take a break, she was the one who argued for continuing just a little longer. You are going to exhaust yourself, Jack finally said, taking the post hole digger from her hands despite her protests. Even experienced ranch hands know better than to work through the hottest part of the day without stopping. I am fine, Emmeline insisted, but Jack noticed that her face was flushed and sweat was dripping down her temples. You are stubborn, Jack corrected, steering her toward the shade of the cottonwood trees. Sit down and drink some water. The posts will still be here in 10 minutes. Emmeline opened her mouth to argue, then seemed to think better of it. She sank down onto the grass beneath the trees with a sigh that suggested she was more tired than she wanted to admit. Jack handed her the canteen he had brought, and she drank deeply before passing it back. Thank you, she said grudgingly. I suppose I am trying to prove something. You do not need to prove anything, Jack said, sitting down a respectful distance away and taking his own drink. Anyone can see you are a hard worker. Can they? Emmeline pulled her knees up and wrapped her arms around them, staring out at the partially dug post holes. My brothers certainly never saw it. No matter how much I did, it was never enough. Or it was the wrong thing. Or it was not a woman's place. Your brothers sound like fools, Jack said bluntly, then winced. Sorry, I should not speak ill of your family. But Emmeline laughed, a genuine sound of amusement that made Jack's heart do something complicated in his chest. Do not apologize for speaking the truth. They are fools, though I suppose they cannot help being products of their upbringing. My father was more progressive in his thinking, but the community we lived in was very traditional. When he died, my brothers fell back on what they had been taught by everyone else. Women should marry and keep house, not breed chickens and talk about genetics. Well, you are in Texas now, Jack said. Things are different out here on the frontier. Women run ranches and businesses all the time. Nobody much cares what you do as long as you pull your weight. Is that true? Emmeline looked at him with such hope in her eyes that Jack felt something twist inside him. Or are you just being kind? It is true, Jack assured her. I have known female ranch owners, women who run freight businesses, even a lady doctor who set up practice in San Antonio. The frontier does not have patience for old-world notions about what women can and cannot do. We need everyone working if we are going to survive and prosper. Emmeline was quiet for a long moment, and when she spoke again, her voice was softer. That is good to know. I was worried that I had just traded one narrow-minded situation for another. Not here, Jack said firmly. Mr. Henderson is a fair man, and Sarah runs this household with an iron fist disguised in a velvet glove. They will support you in whatever you want to do. And you? Emmeline asked, turning to look at him directly. What do you think about a woman who wants to build a chicken breeding business instead of catching a husband? Jack met her gaze steadily. I think that sounds like a solid plan. Chickens are more reliable than most people, and at least you know where you stand with them. That surprised another laugh from her, and Jack felt absurdly proud of himself for coaxing it out. That is certainly true. Chickens are honest in their way. They want food and safety and a place to roost. Provide those things and they will provide eggs in return. It is a fair bargain. More than can be said for many human relationships, Jack agreed. They sat in companionable silence for a while longer, and Jack found himself studying her profile when he thought she was not looking. Up close, he could see more details. The faint scatter of freckles across her nose, the determined set of her jaw, the calluses on her capable hands. She was beautiful, but it was a practical sort of beauty, the kind that came from strength and purpose rather than idle decoration. We should get back to work, Emmeline said eventually, rising to her feet and brushing grass from her skirt. Those posts will not dig themselves. They worked through the morning, taking frequent breaks in the shade as the temperature climbed. By noon, all the posts were in place and set with rocks and packed earth. They broke for dinner at the main house, where Sarah had prepared a feast of fried chicken, biscuits, and greens from her garden. Henderson and some of the other ranch hands joined them, and the meal was filled with easy conversation about ranch business and plans for the upcoming cattle drive in September. After dinner, Jack and Emmeline returned to the building site, this time joined by Billy, who was eager to help. They spent the afternoon framing out the structure, measuring and cutting lumber with methodical precision. Jack was impressed by Emmeline's skill with the saw. Her cuts were clean and accurate, and she needed very little instruction. "Your father taught you well," he commented, as they fitted together the frame for the first wall. "He believed in precision," Emmeline replied, holding the board steady while Jack nailed it in place. He used to say that a carpenter who could not measure twice and cut once was not worth his wages. "Smart man," Jack said, and meant it. By sunset, they had the basic frame completed. Standing back to survey their work, Jack felt a sense of satisfaction that went beyond the simple pleasure of a job well done. There was something deeply right about working alongside Emmeline, matching her rhythm and building something together. "It is going to be magnificent," Emmeline said softly, and when Jack glanced at her, he saw that her eyes were shining. "My chickens are going to have a better home than I ever gave them in Missouri." "We still have got a lot of work to do," Jack cautioned, but he could not help smiling at her enthusiasm. "Walls, roof, nesting boxes, the run. It will be at least another 3 or 4 days before it is finished." "I know," Emmeline said, "but I can see it now how it will look when it is done." "Thank you, Jack. Truly, you did not have to do this." "I wanted to," Jack said, the words coming out more intensely than he had intended. He cleared his throat, suddenly self-conscious. "I mean, it is a good project. Useful." Emmeline looked at him for a long moment, and Jack had the uncomfortable feeling that she could see right through his awkward deflection. But she just smiled and said, "Well, whatever the reason, I am grateful. Now I should go check on my chickens. They have been cooped up in those crates all day, and they must be getting restless." "I will help you," Jack offered immediately. "We can set up a temporary pen for them using some of the spare fencing. At least then they can stretch their legs and get some proper food and water." They spent the next hour constructing a makeshift enclosure near the building site, using fence posts and wire to create a space large enough for all 47 chickens to move around comfortably. When they finally opened the crates and released the birds, the relief was obvious. The chickens poured out in a cascade of brown and white feathers, clucking and pecking at the ground with evident pleasure at their newfound freedom. "Oh, you poor darlings," Emmeline murmured, kneeling down to run her hands over several of the birds. To Jack's surprise, the chickens seemed to recognize her, clustering around her and making soft cooing noises. "I know it has been a terrible journey, but you are home now. Just a few more days, and you will have a proper house." Jack watched, fascinated, as she checked over each bird with a practiced eye, looking for any signs of stress or illness from the journey. She handled them with such gentle confidence that even the most skittish birds settled under her touch. "They trust you," he observed. "I have been handling them since they hatched," Emmeline explained, carefully examining a hen's feet for any problems. "Chickens remember kindness. If you treat them well from the start, they learn that humans are not threats." "That is not something most people think about with chickens," Jack said. "Most folks just think of them as livestock." "They are livestock," Emmeline agreed, straightening up and brushing feathers from her skirt. "But that does not mean they do not deserve to be treated with care and respect. Any animal under my care will be treated well, whether it is a horse, a cow, or a chicken." It was such a simple philosophy, but Jack found himself deeply moved by it. In his experience, many people treated animals as nothing more than tools to be used and discarded. Emmeline's obvious compassion and respect for her chickens spoke to a character that went deeper than surface appearances. "You are going to do well here," he found himself saying. "Texas needs more people like you." Emmeline looked up at him, her expression surprised and pleased. "That is a kind thing to say. I hope you are right." As the sun set over the ranch, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, they stood together watching the chickens settle in their temporary home. Jack was acutely aware of Emmeline's presence beside him, the way the fading light caught in her hair and the peaceful expression on her face. He knew he was in danger of falling for this woman, knew that it was probably foolish given their different circumstances, but he could not seem to stop himself. The next 3 days passed in a blur of sawdust and sweat. Jack and Emmeline worked from sunrise to sunset with Billy and occasionally other ranch hands pitching in when they had spare time. The walls went up first, solid and straight, with careful attention to ventilation and access points. Then came the roof, which they covered with tin sheeting to protect against rain and provide shade from the brutal summer sun. Jack built the nesting boxes with extra care, creating individual spaces that would give the hens privacy and comfort. Emmeline directed the placement of the roosts, explaining that chickens preferred to sleep off the ground and needed bars that were the right diameter for their feet to grip comfortably. As they worked, they talked. Jack learned that Emmeline was 24 years old, that she loved to read but rarely had time for it, and that her favorite season was autumn, when the worst of the heat had passed but winter's cold had not yet arrived. She had a dry sense of humor that snuck up on him, making him laugh at unexpected moments. She was also fiercely intelligent, with opinions on everything from politics to animal husbandry that she was not afraid to express. For her part, Emmeline seemed genuinely interested in Jack's stories about ranch life and his childhood on his family's failed homestead. She asked thoughtful questions and listened with real attention, not the polite but distant interest he had experienced from other women of his acquaintance. On the evening of the third day, as they were putting the finishing touches on the enclosed run, Henderson came by to inspect their progress. He walked around the structure slowly, examining the craftsmanship with a critical eye that made Jack stand a little straighter despite himself. "Well," Henderson said finally, a slow smile spreading across his face, "I told you to build a chicken coop, Jack. You have built a chicken mansion." Jack felt his face heat. "I just wanted to do it right, sir." "Right?" Henderson laughed. "Boy, this is better than my own house was when I first built it. These chickens are going to live better than half the ranchers in the county." Emmeline had come to stand beside Jack, and he could feel her presence like a warm fire on a cold night. "Is it really too much?" she asked Henderson, worry creeping into her voice. "I did not mean to impose so greatly on the ranch's resources." "Too much? Nonsense." Henderson waved away her concerns. "I am impressed, not critical. You two have done excellent work. This structure will last for decades if it is properly maintained." "That was the idea," Jack said quietly. "If Emmeline is planning to stay and build her breeding business, she needs facilities that will not fall apart after one hard winter." Henderson's sharp eyes moved from Jack to Emmeline and back again, and that knowing smile reappeared. "Well then, I would say you have succeeded admirably, Emmeline. You can move your flock in tomorrow morning. They should be quite comfortable." After Henderson left, Jack and Emmeline stood together in the gathering dusk, surveying their completed work. The chicken coop was indeed impressive, larger and sturdier than anything Jack had originally envisioned. It had grown during the construction process, expanding as he thought of new features that would make the chickens safer and more comfortable. Somewhere along the way, it had stopped being just a building project and had become something more, a statement of intent, a gift, a hope for the future. "It really is bigger than the bunkhouse," Emmeline said softly, and Jack could hear the awe in her voice. "You did this for my chickens." "I did it for you," Jack said, the words escaping before he could stop them. "I wanted you to have something that would last. Something that would help you build the life you want here." Emmeline turned to look at him, her green eyes searching his face in the fading light. "Why?" she asked simply. "You barely know me." Jack took a breath, knowing he was about to cross a line but unable to stop himself. "Because from the moment I saw you driving that wagon with your chin up and your chickens clucking behind you, I knew you were someone special. Because you work harder than any person I have ever met, and never complain. Because you treat your chickens with more respect than most people show their fellow humans. Because when you smile, which is not nearly often enough, it makes me want to do anything I can to make you smile again." He stopped, horrified at his own outburst. "I am sorry. That was inappropriate. You are Mr. Henderson's niece, and I'm just a ranch hand. I should not have said any of that." But Emmeline was smiling now, a slow, wondering smile that made Jack's heart stutter in his chest. "Jack Harrington, are you saying you have feelings for me?" "I reckon I am," Jack admitted, since there was no point in denying it now. "But I understand if you do not feel the same way. I know I do not have much to offer. I'm just a cowboy with a small savings and no real prospects beyond working this ranch until I'm too old to sit a horse." "Just a cowboy," Emmeline repeated, and there was something in her tone that made Jack look up. "Jack, do you know what I see when I look at you? I see a man who volunteered to spend his precious free time building shelter for animals he does not even own. I see someone who listens when I talk, who does not dismiss my knowledge or my ambitions. I see a man who works until his hands bleed and never complains, who treats everyone around him with respect and kindness. If that is just a cowboy, then I would say cowboys are in very short supply in this world." Jack felt something loosen in his chest, something he had not even realized was tight. "Does that mean you might feel something for me too?" Instead of answering with words, Emmeline stepped closer, closing the distance between them until Jack could smell the faint scent of sawdust and summer roses that clung to her skin. She reached up and touched his face with one work-roughened hand, her touch gentle despite her calluses. "I think I started falling for you on that first day when you insisted on building a proper coop instead of something makeshift," she said softly. "I've spent my whole life around men who took shortcuts and did the minimum required. You do not do that. You see what needs to be done, and you do it right, even when no one would blame you for doing less. That kind of integrity is rare, Jack, and I would very much like to get to know you better, if you are willing." Jack felt as though his heart might burst through his ribs. Without thinking, he reached up and covered her hand with his own, holding it against his face. "I would like that more than anything." They stood there for a long moment, hands clasped and eyes locked, the chicken coop looming behind them like a monument to unexpected possibilities. Then, because Jack was still a gentleman despite his rough edges, he stepped back and offered her his arm. "May I walk you back to the house, Miss Thornton?" "Only if you start calling me Emmeline," she replied, taking his arm with a smile that made the whole world seem brighter. "I think we are past formalities, do not you?" The next few weeks passed in a golden haze of work and stolen moments. Jack's regular duties on the ranch kept him busy during the days, but every spare moment was spent near Emmeline. They fell into an easy routine. Early mornings helping her tend to the chickens, evenings sitting together on the porch of the main house while Sarah smiled knowingly from her rocking chair, Sundays spent riding out to explore the ranch's vast acreage. Emmeline's chickens thrived in their new home, and true to her word, egg production was impressive. She started selling the surplus in town, and word quickly spread about the quality of her eggs. Within 3 weeks, she had regular customers and was already talking about expanding her flock. Jack loved watching her work with her birds. She had a gentle authority that the chickens responded to, and she could identify each bird by sight and knew their individual personalities. She gave them names like Henrietta and Clementine and Beatrice, and she talked to them while she worked, explaining her plans and observations in a way that would have seemed strange if Jack had not seen how attentive the birds were to her voice. One evening in early September, Jack and Emmeline were sitting by the creek that ran through the southern pasture, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. They had ridden out after supper ostensibly to check on some of the younger cattle that had been moved to this section, but really just wanting time alone together away from the well-meaning but watchful eyes of the ranch. "I have been thinking," Emmeline said, trailing her fingers in the cool water, "about expanding. Not just the flock, but maybe adding some ducks or geese. There is good water here, and I think they would do well." "You have been here less than a month, and you are already planning expansions," Jack teased gently. "You really do not slow down, do you?" Life is too short to go slowly, Emmeline replied, but there was something serious in her tone that made Jack look at her more closely. My father died suddenly. One day he was healthy and working, and 3 weeks later he was gone. It taught me that we cannot count on tomorrow. We have to make the most of today. Jack reached over and took her hand, lacing their fingers together. That is a hard lesson to learn. Yes, Emmeline agreed quietly, but it is an important one. When my brothers tried to make me fit into their narrow vision of what I should be, I realized I could either fight them forever or leave and build my own life. I chose to leave, and I do not regret it. I'm glad you left, Jack said, selfish as that might be. If you had stayed in Missouri, I never would have met you. Emmeline squeezed his hand. What about you? What are your dreams, Jack? You are so busy helping everyone else achieve theirs, but what do you want? It was a question no one had asked him in years, and Jack had to think about his answer. I used to dream of having my own place again, he said slowly. After my family lost the homestead, I told myself I would work hard and save up until I could buy some land of my own. But land is expensive, and it takes a long time to save that kind of money on a ranch hand's wages. How much have you saved? Emmeline asked. Jack felt his face heat. It is not much. Maybe $300 after 5 years of saving every penny I could spare. At this rate, I will be 40 before I have enough for even a small spread. $300 is a lot of money, Emmeline said firmly. You should be proud of that kind of discipline and planning. It does not feel like much when land is selling for $2 to $5 an acre, and you need at least 100 acres to make a viable ranch, Jack replied. Even cheap land at $2 an acre would cost me $200, and that would not leave anything for stock or supplies or buildings. I would need at least $500, maybe more, to start something real. They were quiet for a while, and Jack could almost see the wheels turning in Emmeline's mind. Finally, she spoke. What if we combined our resources? Jack felt his heart skip. What do you mean? I have money saved as well, Emmeline said, turning to face him fully. About $400 from selling eggs and breeding stock in Missouri, plus what my father left me. I was planning to use it to expand my chicken business, but what if we thought bigger? What if we pooled our savings and bought land together? You could raise cattle, and I could raise chickens and whatever other poultry we decided on. We could build something together. The offer was so generous, so trusting that Jack felt his throat tighten. Emmeline, I cannot ask you to risk your savings on my dream. You are not asking, I am offering, Emmeline said, and it would not just be your dream. It would be ours. I want to build something lasting, Jack. Something that is mine, that no one can take away or dismiss as unimportant, but I also want to build it with someone I trust. Someone who sees me as an equal partner, not as an assistant or a burden. Jack stared at her, his mind racing. Are you saying what I think you are saying? I am saying that I have fallen in love with you, Jack Harrington, Emmeline said, and her voice was steady despite the enormity of what she was proposing. I know we have only known each other for a month, but I am a good judge of character, and I know what I want. I want to build a life with you. I want to buy land and raise our animals and create something that is ours. And someday, if you want, I would like to marry you and raise a family in the home we build together. Jack felt as though the ground had shifted beneath him, but in the best possible way. You want to marry me? A ranch hand with nothing but $300 and worn-out boots? I want to marry a good man with a strong work ethic, a kind heart, and dreams worth pursuing, Emmeline corrected. The $300 and worn-out boots are just details. Jack stood up, pulling Emmeline to her feet and into his arms. He held her close, breathing in her scent and feeling the solid reality of her against him. I love you, he said, the words feeling both strange and completely natural. I have loved you since the day you drove up in that wagon full of chickens and looked at this ranch like you were planning to take on the world. So is that a yes? Emmeline asked, tipping her head back to look up at him. That is the biggest yes of my life, Jack said, and then he kissed her, pouring all of his feelings into the embrace. Emmeline kissed him back with equal passion, her arms wrapping around his neck and her body pressing close to his. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Jack rested his forehead against hers. "We should do this properly. I should talk to Mr. Henderson and ask his permission to court you." "Uncle Harold already knows," Emmeline said with a laugh. "He pulled me aside last week and told me that if I had any sense, I would snap you up before some other smart woman did." "He said that?" Jack was both embarrassed and pleased. "He did. He also said you were the best worker he had ever employed and that he would hate to lose you, but he would understand if we decided to strike out on our own." Emmeline paused, then added, "He also said that if we did buy land, he would be willing to sell us some breeding stock at a fair price and would give us good references for credit if we needed it." Jack shook his head in amazement. "That man never ceases to surprise me." "He loves you like a son," Emmeline said simply. "Anyone can see that. Just like Sarah loves me like a daughter. They want us to be happy." "Then we should tell them our plans," Jack said. "And we should start looking for land. If we are really going to do this, we should do it right." They rode back to the ranch hand in hand, their horses walking side by side in the deepening darkness. Jack's mind was already racing ahead, thinking about locations and possibilities. He knew this country well after 5 years of working here, and he had seen some beautiful parcels of land that might be available for purchase. When they reached the ranch, they found Henderson and Sarah sitting on the porch, enjoying the evening cool. Both looked up as Jack and Emmeline dismounted and climbed the steps together, still holding hands. "Well," Henderson said, his eyes twinkling, "I take it you two have something to tell us." "We want to buy land and start our own place," Jack said, deciding to be direct. "We are combining our savings, and we would like your advice on where we should look." Sarah let out a delighted cry and stood up to embrace Emmeline. "Oh, I am so happy for you both. Harold, did you hear? They are going to start their own ranch." "I heard," Henderson said, rising to shake Jack's hand. "Congratulations, son. You have chosen well. Emmeline is the best thing that has happened to this ranch since Sarah agreed to marry me 40 years ago. 38 years, Sarah corrected automatically, still hugging Emmeline. "Feels like 40, Henderson teased, earning a swat from his wife. Then his expression grew more serious. "Jack, Emmeline, if you are serious about this, I have a proposition for you. There is a 160-acre parcel that adjoins the southern boundary of the Double H. The owner is an old friend of mine who has been talking about selling and moving to California to be near his daughter. He has been asking $1,800 for it, which is a fair price. There is good water, decent grazing, and a small cabin that needs work but is structurally sound." Jack did quick calculations in his head. "That is more than we have saved." "I know," Henderson said, "but I have been thinking. You have worked for me for 5 years, Jack, and you have never asked for a raise or taken time off or caused any trouble. You have earned more than I have paid you, in all honesty. I would like to give you a bonus of $500, consider it back wages, and a thank you for your loyal service." "Mr. Henderson, I cannot accept that," Jack protested. "You have already been more than fair with me." "You can and you will," Henderson said firmly. "And before you argue, I am also willing to loan you the remaining $600 at a very favorable interest rate. You can pay me back over the next 5 years from your profits. By my calculations, that would give you enough to buy the land, purchase some breeding stock, and have a small cushion for supplies and emergencies." Jack felt his eyes sting with unexpected tears. "Sir, I do not know what to say." "Say you will take the offer," Henderson replied. "Sarah and I have been talking about this for weeks now, ever since it became clear that you two were falling in love. We want to help you get started. Consider it an investment in the future. And besides, if you are neighbors, we can still benefit from Emmeline's excellent chickens and your help during cattle drives." Emmeline looked at Jack, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "What do you think?" "I think we would be fools to turn down such generosity," Jack said honestly. "Mr. Henderson, Mrs. Henderson, thank you. We will work hard and make you proud." "I have no doubt of that," Henderson said warmly. "Now how about we celebrate with some of Sarah's apple pie? I believe she made 2 of them this afternoon, and they are not going to eat themselves. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity. Henderson arranged a meeting with his friend, a grizzled rancher named Tom Morrison, who was indeed eager to sell his land and move to California. The parcel was even better than Henderson had described, with a year-round creek, natural shelter from winter winds, and soil that would support gardens and hay production. The cabin was small but solid, built of logs with a stone fireplace and 2 rooms that could be expanded later. It had been empty for a few months since Morrison had already moved in with his son's family while finalizing his plans, but it was weatherproof and structurally sound. Jack and Emmeline walked every inch of the property, making plans and dreaming aloud. She pointed out perfect spots for expanded chicken coops and maybe a duck pond. He identified areas for pasture improvement and where they could build a barn. They both agreed on the best location for a vegetable garden near the cabin where it would be easy to tend and water. The sale was finalized in late September, and suddenly Jack found himself a landowner for the first time in his life. The feeling was both exhilarating and terrifying. He lay awake at night thinking about all the work that needed to be done, all the ways they could fail, all the responsibilities that now rested on his shoulders. But then Emmeline would find him in the morning, her eyes bright with excitement as she described her latest plan or showed him a sketch she had made of how they might arrange the chicken coops, and his fears would fade. They were in this together, and that made all the difference. They decided to wait until spring to officially move to their new land, using the winter months to prepare. Jack continued working for Henderson, but every spare moment was spent at their property, making repairs to the cabin, building chicken coops and a small barn, clearing land for gardens and pastures. Emmeline threw herself into the work with characteristic energy, often laboring beside Jack until long after sunset. She had moved her chickens to their new property in October, building them an even more impressive coop than the one Jack had constructed at the Double H. The birds thrived in their new home, and Emmeline's egg sales continued to grow. On a cold December evening, as they sat in their tiny cabin warming themselves by the fire after a day of hard work, Jack pulled out a small box from his pocket. He had ridden into town the previous week and spent a significant portion of his remaining savings on what the box contained. "Emmeline," he said, his voice suddenly nervous, "I know we have already talked about getting married, but I want to do this properly. I want to ask you the right way." He got down on one knee in front of where she sat and opened the box to reveal a simple gold band with a small garnet stone. "It is not much," he said quickly, "not like what you deserve. But the shopkeeper said garnets represent devotion and love, and I thought that was fitting." Emmeline's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide and bright with tears. "Jack, it is beautiful. Emmeline Thornton, will you marry me? Will you be my wife and my partner and the mother of my children? Will you build this life with me and let me spend every day trying to make you as happy as you have made me?" "Yes," Emmeline said, her voice breaking on the word. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." Jack slipped the ring onto her finger, and then she was in his arms, kissing him with a fierce joy that made his heart soar. They held each other in front of the fireplace, the wind howling outside but warmth surrounding them, and Jack thought that he had never been happier in his entire life. They were married in early March of 1885, in a simple ceremony at the church in town. Sarah Henderson cried happy tears and fussed over Emmeline's simple white dress, which she had sewn herself over the winter months. Henderson stood up as Jack's best man, gruff and proud, and most of the ranch hands from the Double H attended to show their support. The circuit preacher who performed the ceremony was a cheerful man who had been riding this territory for 20 years. He spoke about the challenges and rewards of building a life on the frontier, about partnership and respect, and working together toward common goals. His words resonated deeply with both Jack and Emmeline, and when they exchanged their vows, they meant every word. After the ceremony, Sarah hosted a celebration at the Double H with food and music and dancing that lasted well into the evening. Jack danced with his new wife beneath the stars, holding her close and marveling at the fact that she was truly his now, his partner, in every sense of the word. When they finally rode back to their own land that night, to the cabin that was now truly their home, Jack carried Emmeline over the threshold with all the solemnity and joy the moment deserved. They made love for the first time that night, a tender and passionate exploration that left them both breathless and amazed. In the morning, they woke to sunshine streaming through the windows and the sound of chickens greeting the day. Emmeline stretched beside him, a smile playing on her lips, and Jack thought that this was what happiness felt like. Not grand gestures or dramatic moments, but simple mornings waking up beside the person you loved, ready to face whatever challenges the day might bring. That first year of marriage was hard work from dawn to dusk, but it was also the happiest time of Jack's life. They fell into a rhythm that played to both their strengths. Jack handled the cattle and horses, building up their small herd through careful purchases and some breeding stock provided by Henderson. Emmeline managed her rapidly expanding poultry operation, adding ducks and geese as she had planned, and developing a reputation throughout the county for quality birds and eggs. They worked side by side on the endless tasks of running a ranch, mending fences, planting and tending their garden, putting up hay for the winter, making improvements to their buildings. Every evening, no matter how tired they were, they made time to sit together and talk about their day, sharing triumphs and frustrations, making plans and adjustments. In July, Emmeline came to him with news that made Jack's heart nearly burst with joy. She was expecting a baby due sometime in early February. The pregnancy was not easy, and there were days when Emmeline felt too ill to work, but she never complained. Jack took over more of her tasks, learning to feed and care for the chickens with the same gentle attention she had always shown. Henderson and Sarah were delighted at the news and insisted that Emmeline spend the last month of her pregnancy at the Double H, where Sarah could help care for her and the doctor could reach them quickly if needed. Jack was torn between gratitude for their kindness and frustration at being separated from his wife, but Emmeline insisted it was the practical choice. Their son was born on a snowy February morning in 1886, arriving with lusty cries that announced his presence to the world. Jack, who had been pacing outside the bedroom door for hours, rushed in the moment Sarah gave permission and found Emmeline exhausted but radiant, holding a red-faced, squalling bundle. "Meet your son," she said softly, and Jack approached with trembling hands to take the baby for the first time. He was perfect, tiny and impossibly fragile-looking, with a shock of dark hair and eyes that would eventually settle into the same stormy gray as Jack's own. Jack felt his throat close with emotion as he looked down at his son, this incredible person that he and Emmeline had created together. "What should we name him?" Jack asked, unable to look away from the baby's face. "I was thinking Samuel," Emmeline said, "after my father, if that is all right with you." "Samuel Harrington," Jack said, testing the name. "I think that is perfect." They brought Samuel home when he was a week old, bundling him against the late winter cold and settling him into the cradle that Jack had built during the long evenings of Emmeline's pregnancy. The baby transformed their lives in ways both expected and surprising, demanding constant attention but also bringing a joy that exceeded anything they had imagined. Emmeline recovered her strength quickly and was soon back to managing her poultry, though now she carried Samuel in a sling against her chest as she worked. The baby seemed content with this arrangement, often falling asleep to the sound of clucking chickens and his mother's soft voice. As spring arrived and the ranch came back to life after winter's dormancy, Jack looked around at what they had built and felt a deep sense of accomplishment. Their small ranch was thriving, with healthy cattle, productive poultry, and gardens that promised a good harvest. They had paid off a significant portion of their loan to Henderson, and their reputation for quality was spreading throughout the region. But more than the material success, what filled Jack with contentment was the life they had created together. Emmeline was everything he had hoped for in a wife and more. A true partner who worked beside him, challenged him, supported him, and loved him with a steadfast devotion that made every day brighter. One evening in late May, as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset while Samuel dozed in Emmeline's arms, she turned to him with a thoughtful expression. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked quietly. Giving up the security of working for Uncle Harold to take this risk? Jack considered the question seriously, then shook his head. Not for a moment. This life is harder and more uncertain, but it is ours. We built it together, and everything we accomplish belongs to us. That is worth more than any amount of security. I feel the same way, Emmeline said, looking down at their sleeping son. Sometimes I think about what my life would have been like if I had stayed in Missouri. If I had given in to my brother's demands and found some man to marry who would have expected me to give up my chickens and my ambitions, I would have been miserable. Well, you did find some man to marry, Jack teased gently. You just found the right one. Emmeline laughed, the sound still making Jack's heart skip even after a year of marriage. I suppose I did. Though you are not just some man. You are my best friend and my partner, and the love of my life. The feeling is entirely mutual, Jack assured her, leaning over to kiss her softly, careful not to disturb the baby. The years that followed were not without challenges. There were droughts that tested their water management, harsh winters that pushed their resources to the limit, and the constant struggle of building a business from the ground up. But there were also triumphs. The year their cattle herd doubled through successful breeding, the contract Emmeline secured to supply eggs to 3 different general stores in nearby towns, the addition of 2 more rooms to their cabin as their family grew. Samuel was joined by a sister, Grace, in 1888, and then another brother, Thomas, in 1890. The children grew up surrounded by animals and wide open spaces, learning the value of hard work and the satisfaction of caring for living things. They helped with chores as soon as they were old enough, gathering eggs and feeding chickens, learning to ride and rope alongside their father. Emmeline expanded her poultry operation until it became one of the most successful in the county. She began offering breeding stock for sale, and people came from as far as 50 miles away to purchase her carefully bred chickens. She kept meticulous records and continued to refine her breeding program, always striving for improvement. Jack built their cattle herd slowly but steadily, focusing on quality over quantity. He developed a reputation for honest dealing and fair prices, and their beef commanded premium rates at market. They paid off their loan to Henderson 2 years ahead of schedule and began saving toward purchasing additional land. Through it all, the original chicken coop that Jack had built during that first week after Emmeline's arrival remained standing at the Double H Ranch, a monument to where their love story had begun. Henderson refused to tear it down even though he had no need for such a large structure, insisting that it was a reminder of the day his niece arrived with her chickens and captured the heart of his best ranch hand. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Jack and Emmeline rode out to the Double H for a celebration dinner. After the meal, Jack asked if they could walk out to see the old chicken coop, and Emmeline agreed with a smile that suggested she knew what he was thinking. The structure was still solid, though it showed signs of age and weather. Some of the tin roof panels had been replaced, and the wood had weathered to a silver gray, but the basic craftsmanship remained sound. They stood together in the doorway, looking at the empty interior that had once housed 47 chickens. "Do you remember the first time we stood here together?" Jack asked, taking Emmeline's hand. "You asked me why I was putting so much effort into building a chicken coop for someone I barely knew. And you said you wanted me to have something that would last," Emmeline recalled, squeezing his hand. "Something that would help me build the life I wanted." "I meant it," Jack said. "But what I did not say, what I did not even fully realize at the time, was that I was already falling in love with you. I was building that co-op bigger and better than it needed to be because I wanted to impress you. I wanted you to see me as someone worthy of your attention." Emmeline turned to face him, her eyes soft with emotion. "You were always worthy of my attention, Jack, from that very first day when you insisted on doing things right instead of taking shortcuts. You showed me who you were through your actions, and I fell in love with the man I saw." "We have built a good life together," Jack said, pulling her close. "Better than I ever dreamed possible when I was just a ranch hand with $300 and big dreams." "We have," Emmeline agreed, "and we are not finished yet. There is still so much more we can accomplish together." As they walked back to the main house hand in hand, Jack reflected on the strange and wonderful twists that life could take. If someone had told him 10 years ago that a woman would arrive at the Double H Ranch with a wagon full of chickens and proceed to turn his entire world upside down, he would have laughed at the absurdity. But that was exactly what had happened, and he would not change a single moment of it. The years continued to pass, bringing both joys and sorrows. Henderson passed away in 1892, and they mourned him deeply, grateful for all he had done to help them succeed. Sarah lived for another 8 years, becoming a beloved grandmother figure to their children before joining her husband in 1900. They left the Double H to Jack and Emmeline in their will, recognizing them as the true heirs to everything they had built. Jack and Emmeline combined the two properties, creating one of the largest and most successful ranches in the county. They hired good people to help manage the expanded operation, but they never forgot where they had come from or the values that had guided them from the beginning: hard work, fair dealing, and respect for all living things. Their children grew up strong and capable. Samuel showed a gift for working with cattle and eventually took over management of that side of the business. Grace inherited her mother's talent with poultry and expanded the operation to include turkeys and even peacocks for wealthy customers who wanted exotic birds. Thomas discovered a passion for horses and built a respected breeding program for working ranch horses. As Jack and Emmeline grew older, they gradually turned more of the daily operations over to their children. Though neither ever fully retired, they were most often found working side by side in the gardens or sitting on their porch in the evenings, watching the sunset and talking about their day just as they had done for decades. In 1914, as they celebrated their 30th wedding anniversary, their children organized a grand party with friends and neighbors from across the county. There were speeches and toasts, stories shared about the early days of the ranch, and much laughter and joy. Late in the evening, after most of the guests had departed, Jack and Emmeline found themselves alone on their porch, just as they had been so many thousands of times before. Emmeline rested her head on Jack's shoulder, her hair now more silver than copper, and sighed contentedly. 30 years, she mused. It seems like both a lifetime and no time at all. I know what you mean, Jack replied, his own hair now completely gray, but his eyes still the same stormy color that had first caught Emmeline's attention. Sometimes I feel every one of those years in my bones, especially on cold mornings. But then I look at you, and I am that 26-year-old ranch hand again, watching you drive up with your chickens and thinking you were the most impressive thing I had ever seen. You built me a chicken coop bigger than your bunkhouse, Emmeline said softly, as she had many times over the years. It had become a sort of touchstone between them, a reminder of where they had started. Best decision I ever made, Jack replied, as he always did. Led to everything else good in my life. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the familiar sounds of the ranch settling down for the night. Cattle lowing in the distance, horses shifting in the barn, the soft clucking of chickens roosting in their coops. 3 generations of chickens descended from those original 47 birds that Emmeline had brought from Missouri now lived on their land, a living legacy of her determination and skill. Do you think we did all right? Emmeline asked suddenly. With our lives, I mean. Did we make the most of what we were given? Jack considered the question carefully, as he always did when Emmeline asked something important. He thought about the land they had cultivated, the children they had raised, the business they had built from nothing. He thought about the fair wages they paid their workers, the reputation for integrity they had earned, the community they had helped build. But most of all, he thought about the love that had sustained them through 3 decades of challenges and triumphs. I think we did better than all right, he said finally. We built something real and lasting, not just in terms of land and cattle and chickens, but in terms of family and values and love. We proved that 2 people who respect each other and work together can accomplish extraordinary things, and we did it all without compromising who we are or what we believe in. I would say that is a life well lived. Emmeline lifted her head to look at him, her green eyes still bright despite the lines that time had etched around them. I love you, Jack Harrington. Just as much today as I did when you first told me you were building that chicken coop because you wanted me to have something that would last." "I love you too," Jack said, leaning down to kiss her with all the tenderness and passion of 3 decades of devotion. "And I always will, until my last breath and beyond." As the stars emerged overhead and the Texas night wrapped around them like a familiar blanket, Jack and Emmeline sat together on their porch, hands clasped and hearts entwined, grateful for every moment of the life they had built together. It had started with 47 chickens and a chicken coop bigger than a bunkhouse, but it had become so much more. A love story for the ages, a testament to hard work and partnership, and a legacy that would endure for generations to come. Their grandchildren would eventually inherit the ranch, carrying forward the values and vision that Jack and Emmeline had established. The poultry business would continue to thrive and expand, and the cattle operation would adapt to changing times while maintaining its commitment to quality. But the real legacy was not measured in acres or animals or dollars. The true legacy was in the story itself. The tale of a determined woman who brought her chickens to Texas and the cowboy who saw her worth and built her a coop bigger than his own bunkhouse, not just to house her birds, but to show her that her dreams mattered, that she mattered, and that together they could build something extraordinary. It was a story that would be told and retold around dinner tables and on front porches for generations, growing slightly more embellished with each telling but never losing its essential truth. That love, when combined with respect, partnership, and hard work, could overcome any obstacle and build a life worth living. And every time someone drove past the old Double H ranch and saw that original chicken coop still standing decades after it was built, they would remember the love story it represented and smile, knowing that some things really do last forever when they are built with care, intention, and a heart full of hope. Jack and Emmeline Harrington lived into their 80s, blessed with good health and surrounded by family. They worked together until the end, never losing their love for the land or for each other. When Jack finally passed away in 1925, Emmeline held his hand and whispered that she would see him soon, that their story was not ending but merely pausing until they could be together again. She joined him 6 months later, and they were buried side by side on a hill overlooking their ranch, the land they had loved and tended for over 40 years. Their graves were marked with simple stones that bore their names, dates, and a single inscription that captured the essence of their love story: partners in all things now and always. The ranch continued to prosper under their children's management, and then their grandchildren's, and then their great-grandchildren's. The original chicken coop at the Double H, reinforced and maintained over the decades, became a historical landmark, a reminder of a time when the frontier was wild and open, and 2 people with nothing but determination and love could build an empire from scratch. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the wind blew just right, people swore they could see 2 figures sitting on the porch of the old homestead, hand in hand, watching the sunset together just as they had done for so many years. Whether it was truly the spirits of Jack and Emmeline or just the play of light and shadow, no one could say. But it brought comfort to know that their love story had not ended with death, but had simply transformed into something eternal, a reminder that true love, like a well-built chicken coop, was meant to last forever. The chickens still clucked in their coops, descendants of those 47 birds that had traveled from Missouri to Texas all those years ago. The cattle still grazed on the rich grasslands that Jack had carefully managed. The gardens still bloomed in the spots that Emmeline had chosen, and the legacy of 2 people who had dared to dream and work together to make those dreams reality lived on in every corner of the ranch they had built. It was a happy ending, the kind that comes not from fairy tale magic, but from years of dedication, mutual respect, and a love that grew stronger with each passing day. It was the story of she who brought her own chickens to the ranch, and the cowboy who built a coop bigger than his own bunkhouse because he knew from the very beginning that she and her dreams were worth every nail, every board, and every drop of sweat he could give. And in the end, that was all that mattered. Not the size of the ranch they built, or the money they earned, or the accolades they received, but the simple truth that they had loved each other well and completely, building a life together that honored both their individual strengths and their shared vision. It was a love story for the ages, born in the Wild West of 1884 and lasting far beyond the lives of its participants, inspiring everyone who heard it to believe that true love and partnership were worth fighting for, worth working for, and worth building a chicken coop bigger than a bunkhouse for. Their story became legend, passed down through generations, adapted and embellished, but never losing its essential truth. It reminded people that grand gestures of love did not have to be dramatic or expensive. Sometimes they looked like a cowboy spending his free time building the best chicken coop he could because he wanted to help a woman achieve her dreams. Sometimes they looked like a woman trusting a man she had just met to understand her ambitions and support them. Sometimes they looked like two people choosing to combine their resources and their lives, betting everything on each other and on the future they could build together. In a world that often seemed cynical and harsh, the story of Jack and Emmeline Harrington was a beacon of hope, a reminder that love could be practical and romantic, that partnership could be passionate and productive, and that two people who truly committed to each other could weather any storm and build something beautiful and lasting. The ranch they founded continued to thrive well into the 20th century and beyond, adapting to changing times while maintaining the core values that Jack and Emmeline had established: hard work, fair dealing, respect for all living things, and the belief that anything worth doing was worth doing right. Their descendants carried these values forward, ensuring that the legacy of the cowboy and his wife who brought her own chickens was never forgotten. And so the story ended not with a grand dramatic flourish, but with the quiet satisfaction of a life well lived, a love well tended, and a legacy well established. Jack and Emmeline Harrington had taken their chances, followed their hearts, and built something that lasted far beyond their own lifetimes. They had proven that the best love stories were not found in fairy tales, but in the everyday choices to support, respect, and cherish each other through all of life's challenges and triumphs. Their chicken coop, bigger than a bunkhouse and built with love, stood as a monument to that simple truth for over 100 years, a physical reminder that when you build something with care and intention, when you put your whole heart into creating something for someone you love, it can last forever. Just like their love story, it remained standing long after its creators had passed, inspiring new generations to believe in the power of partnership, determination, and a love that was willing to build something extraordinary out of nothing more than 47 chickens, $300, and two hearts brave enough to take a chance on each other. And if that was not a perfect ending to a perfect love story, then nothing was.